When limerence hits you, it really can feel like you've been struck by a magical force, a thunderbolt or Cupid's arrow or a love spell. That sense of being struck by an irresistible force can make some limerents feel powerless, as though their limerent object is now in charge of their fate, that they've been robbed of their agency. They feel helpless, blameless, a victim of love. And if you're the spouse of somebody who's become limerent outside the marriage, that question of fault and blame is very important as well. Did your partner betray you, or were they actively pursued by a mate-poaching outsider? Well, in this video, we're going to analyse who is to blame for limerence and what can be done next. Hi, my name is Tom Bellamy. I'm a neuroscientist and writer, and I blog all about limerence at livingwithlimerence.com. I'm also the author of the book Smitten, that explains how neuroscience can help us make sense of limerence and how to recover from it. Right, let's get into the difficult business of apportioning blame. Perhaps the obvious place to start is to say that, of course, we are each responsible for our own choices and our own behaviour. You probably already knew that would be an important part of the analysis. But frankly, in many cases, the behaviour of a limerent object can reinforce a sense of special connection. Perhaps they encourage emotional intimacy, flirt outrageously, enjoy the attention, or just seem to radiate an aura of attractiveness that seems uncanny. Despite wanting to resist, limerents can find themselves baffled by their inability to stay strong when their limerent object turns on the charm. They dance to the tune as though they're bewitched. So, how much blame must the limerent object bear for the development of limerence in us? Should flirts bear some responsibility for misleading hapless limerents? Is there some truth to the idea that limerents are powerless to resist a predatory limerent object? Just how culpable are they in feeding the mania? Well, a good way to break this down is to look at the problem from the perspective of the limerent object and what possible contributions they could be making to the problem. So we'll work through some cases, starting with the simplest. Okay, so first is the unknowing limerent object. So one of the most powerful counter-arguments to the idea that the limerent object bears some blame for the emergence of limerence is the existence of oblivious limerent objects who have no idea how the limerent is feeling. Now, a good example of this is presented in Dorothy Tenoff's book Love and Limerence, where she first introduced the concept of limerence, and it involves a young man called Fred who was studying abroad in France. Now, Fred became limerent for Laura, the receptionist at the hostel in which he was staying, and it's very clear from Fred's diary entries that the relationship between them was superficial, businesslike, and as he knew himself in moments of lucidity, nothing more than the kind of friendly acquaintance that you would expect for somebody in Laura's position. So this case is a clear-cut example of Laura becoming a limerent object simply because she was there. Fred needed a limerence experience for some reason of his own. He was in a vulnerable period of his life, and it grew entirely from a one-sided fantasy that played out in his head. His only real explanation for the triggering of the limerence was a glance that passed between them as he was paying his bill. To quote him, "It was the way she looked at me that did it." Really, Laura did nothing to encourage Fred and a fair amount to discourage him, and yet he succumbed to limerence anyway. And in this sort of scenario, it's hard to think of anything that the limerent object could be blamed for. At the other end of the scale, we have a narcissist limerent object. So they see the limerent as a source of narcissistic supply, and they delight in keeping the limerent hanging on, validating their own wonderfulness. So in these cases, there does seem to be plenty of blame for the limerent object. They may even have initiated that initial glimmer of attraction and fanned it into a flame so that they could cultivate an attachment that suited their own ends. Even worse, because narcissistic limerent objects are not emotionally invested, they will run hot and cold with the limerent depending on what other entertainment they have in their lives. So if they're bored, their pet limerent will be stroked and cajoled and given some attention. But if they've spied another shiny object that they want more, then the limerent becomes an irritation and is treated disdainfully or ignored. That, of course, feeds the uncertainty engine of limerence. The limerent doesn't know where they stand. So this is a scenario in which vulnerable limerents can reasonably feel that they've been treated unfairly. Okay, a third case is a bit more complicated, and this would be the case of mutual limerence. Now, if both limerents are single and able to form a relationship, well, then that's fantastic. They get the happy days, the ecstatic union. But if they're not both available, then a mutually destructive spiral of behavior can unfold, where the two limerents oscillate between drawing closer together and then drawing back, and they're both battling their obsession. Now, it's also likely that the strength of the limerents will vary, both between the two partners and over time. And so one can be pulling when the other is pushing, and that, of course, will unsettle both. And so a sort of unhealthy tug of war continues. In the thick of an episode like this, the blame seems like it can be pretty evenly shared. Both participants are instigator and sufferer, and whoever is most blameworthy can vary from day to day. Okay, so those are three quite different scenarios, but to judge from my inbox, far more common is a fourth, where the limerent object is ambivalent. So it's not clear what they feel. They're hard to read, or they're non-committal in one way or another. So here we're on a more middling ground. Sometimes the limerent feels encouraged by things that the limerent object says or does. He always kisses me goodbye and holds on tight. She says that I understand her better than any other man she has ever known. But other times the limerent is discouraged. He says that it's complicated at the moment and he's sorry if he led me on. She gave me a hug but whispered in my ear, "You should stay away from me." It often seems in these scenarios as though the limerent object values the company of the limerent and sometimes seeks their emotional support. But perhaps they're just flattered by the attention, but not interested romantically. Perhaps they're a non-limerent, and so they're operating from a completely different set of assumptions about what friendship and love are like. Perhaps they're embarrassed by the attention, but also very shy or tender-hearted, and they can't bear the thought of hurting the limerent's feelings by rejecting them bluntly. Perhaps they just want to be friends and are a bit irritated by the limerent's emotional incontinence. Whatever the real situation, it becomes very difficult to disentangle who said what or meant what or did what, who led who on. But ironically, this incredibly common and complicated and confusing situation actually clarifies everything. We can't read their minds. We don't know their motives. They might be innocent or they might be selfish. Our limerent objects might sometimes be getting something from us in a way that seems selfish and transactional. But the thing is, so are we. By definition, a limerent is getting an astonishingly powerful emotional high from the company of their limerent object. And we don't often ask nicely or behave transparently or admit that our friendship is not really just a friendship to us. We keep going back day after day to get our happy fix, and we share intimacies because it lights up our reward pathways and it makes our life seem vital and more colourful and exhilarating. And we hang around waiting for those "I feel safe with you" comments because of the thrill that it gives us. So ultimately it comes down to this. We can hardly blame our self-centered or ambivalent limerent objects for sometimes using us for their emotional needs, because that's exactly what we're doing to them. Much healthier than trying to tally blame and to convince ourselves that they're more in the wrong than we are, is to focus on what we are doing, what choices we are making, and what we want to do next. We have to decide who's in control of our lives. From the perspective of an unhappy limerent, it doesn't actually matter much who's to blame. You have to decide if you're going to let it continue. They could be the biggest flirt in the world, or they could give you more mixed signals than a miswired telephone exchange. But all you have to decide is, do you want to leave them in charge of your fate and in charge of your emotions? They are going to behave as they choose, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to change that. So, do you want to try and make them admit their shortcomings, or do you want to be free? A key step in managing limerence is accepting that that sense of an external force is an illusion. Limerence arises from within you, and your imagination provides the fertile soil in which it grows. Nobody ever got over limerence by proving to themselves that it was all the limerent object's fault. Taking charge of yourself is the only path to freedom. Now, if you'd like to know more about how to take control, move beyond blame, and reverse your unwanted limerence, there's a free ebook available at the livingwithlimerence.com site that can help, and I've put a link in the description below. But for more on what kinds of people are especially bewitching and how limerent objects can make limerence worse, watch this video on romantic archetypes. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope it was helpful. Subscribe if you'd like more, and I'll see you next time.